speechless. I'm speechless.
Jeez.
I
spend way too much time
Pontificating. What was that other word you said that started with a P?
Pedantic.
Pedantic?
Yes.
Pedantic is an adjective.
All right.
Chris is pedantic.
He's a pedantic pontificator.
Chris pontificates pedantically.
With a spirit
while parenting
of know-it-allism borrowed from the hierarchy.
Chris, professor...
No, it's not. It's negative.
Professor pontificates pedantically while parenting puppies.
Perfect.
Perfectly. Puh.
So here we are on the combat-based podcast.
Podcasting.
The pontificating, rapidly proliferating podcast.
There we go. I
Pedantically pontificating podcast professor.
Which is a whole weird thing. And for those of you online, we earlier were just having an interesting little discussion about the phenomenon of podcasts and why people want to be on them, why people want to have them. What's the point? And
the point of pontificating.
And I would say,
pedantically,
my wife is often, as a good model, someone who just ignores all the bullshit on podcasts and all that stuff.
Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Don't ignore this.
But now we're doing one.
So we're back.
Again.
Another episode. We're here with the CEO, the OG grappling guy, the CEO, the OG grappling guy, John behind the lens, and I'm the producer.
Yay.
Melissa, Chris, John, Tobin. Boom.
And if you get bored out there in podcast listener land, put it at 1.25 speed or even 1.5.
And drive your wife nuts!
Like, God, this guy talks slow. Let's put it on 1.75 speed.
We do not talk slow.
I know.
All right. So our purpose of coming together today, though, is we do have a topic. We have a historical pod.
Ooh, boy.
Yeah.
Why is history
If it's historical, it's hysterical.
It could be. I think, so we want to hear about the origins of the Machado Academy. Because, Chris, you're one of the people that lived through the beginning of their generation from immigrating to the United States and then being the legends that they are today. I can call John Jacques a legend, right?
Oh, yeah.
Vegan?
We can call them legends.
They're all legends.
Just
They're
not
legends.
Chris. You can't call Chris a legend.
No,
Do not
don't call me a
Chris
fucking legend. Yeah.
You can call me a legend.
I like the venerable. The venerable.
Venerable
is like perfect.
I like that.
That's like
the legendary CEO.
So
Machado origin story.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to hear your perspective on this. And there's one detail that I want to hit. But let's start there. So we'll back up from there. But this was the first place that they taught when they left the Gracie.
This
get to
right
that.
here,
Yes.
where
Right
we're
here. We'll
at.
get
Right on this land, not this particular structure, but right on this land, yes.
This land
But
is made for you and the Machados.
we definitely must preface this with this is one single tiny perspective.
Yeah.
There's a story that's often used in usually Taoism, sometimes Buddhism, where you have three blind men and an elephant, and they describe what they are observing because they can only observe with feel. One feels the trunk and thinks it's a snake. One feels the ear and thinks it's a plant. One feels the leg or thing and thinks it's a moose or like whatever, right? So
my head's going in strange places.
no, one does not feel the cock. Boy, yeah, God. Bad metaphor. All right. But anyways, perspective is everything, right?
Yeah.
And part of the postmodern critique of modernism, which is there's objective truth.
Uh-huh.
It is objectively true that the guy that felt the trunk interpreted it as a snake because it does the same thing, it moves the same, whatever, right? And it's objectively true. So objectivity also has its flaw. Now, and for those out there who want to go, oh, he's a postmodernist, subjective, everything.
I'm sure that's what they're all thinking.
That's what I would be thinking.
You're special.
It's like, oh, these postmodern truth and nothing's real, nothing's true.
Okay,
there are no
on.
facts. All right, but anyhow, so my story is just that, mine, and it's a little tiny perspective. And each person that trained with Machados has their own perspective, and each of them have their own perspective. And that is true of all of history. And which is why did they say history is written by the victors, right? It's not that that's the victor's goal. It's that that's who's left to write it. Yeah. Because back in the age where the enemy was completely wiped out, they didn't get to have their say. And the Machados, when I met them, I was young. They were young. The Gracies were all pretty young, other than Helio, Carlos, George, the older guys who were
They were old.
The dons of the established had already had some maturity and some vision of what this thing is supposed to be. And this was a phase where, I always say, in the 90s, jiu-jitsu was starting to blow up around the world. Simultaneously, so was the internet. And it was this mass information phase where in 1980, if you wanted to find martial arts knowledge, you had to go physically driving around and see if you could drive past a school.
What about the phone book?
Or the phone book.
Remember those?
Yes. And the good places, everybody knew where the tough guys trained was in garages. They didn't teach kids classes and advertise self-defense. They taught physical combat. And we talked earlier, I don't know if it's on the pod or not, but a boxing gym model, you have the wrestling room model, you have the martial arts hierarchical pyramid model. And each of them have a weakness and a strength. Now, the garage days in the early days were kind of this experimental laboratory that really did have the best of all of those worlds, because it was before jiu-jitsu had become totally canonized. Now, the elders will say it was already canonized. And they canonized it before Spider Guard, before De La Hiva Guard, and obviously before Barambolos, right? So the old always rejects the new, then eventually adapts it and claims we always did it. That's like very typical of culture. Mm-hmm. And the Machados, like when I first met Hegan, one of the things that I was struck with, and when I met him, he was Hegan Gracie, because that's how that culture works too. Just like Roger Gomez is Roger Gracie.
Wait, can I ask real quick? So the Horian came in the late 70s, right? And
I don't know.
Horian came in the late 70s, according to Richard Bresler. That's when Richard Bresler started training in Hermosa Beach in 1979. I read the book. It's a good book, worth defending.
Which was 9 years before I started.
Yes.
And then you showed up in 1988 in the garage. So Horian's doing 10 years of garage teaching.
And that's technically Horian's second or third garage.
Okay. And then when you showed up in 1988, were the Machados there?
Hegan was.
Hegan was there.
It was.
Hegan Gracie.
My first 2 weeks there was Hoyce Gracie, Hegan Gracie, Machado, and Horion. That was who was running it. Hickson would come in and out of Horion's garage. And one time I saw a Hoyler there. Mm-hmm. And this was when I was clueless as to what was happening with their family beefs or any of that. Mm-hmm. But I could distinctly say, and some say that us humans are very perceptive at our first impressions are often very true. Our feelings that we have about whoever it was. And you could instantly tell Hickson was the alpha. He was the warrior. Like it was beyond a shadow of a doubt. Hegan was the athlete and the nice guy and the willing coach. And Hoyce was definitely, I thought he was Horion's son. But basically, he was Horion's loyal guy.
He was his little brother.
Right.
Like much younger brother.
And Horion, one could argue, burned hoist. But see, the one thing that I always say that I'm not going to speak about publicly at all, largely because
The one thing I'm going to say that I'm not going to speak about publicly at all.
that I will not publicly speak about
Oh.
is I'm not going to shit talk any of them, even if I think in private they deserve it. So does everybody. So does my own family. So do my own parents. But the problem with things online on the media and all that is when you shit talk, you're going to be remembered for it.
Mm-hmm.
And the book, Opening a Closed Guard, I recommend anyone to read if they really want to understand a bigger history
A
of this,
bigger history. It's that big.
which has a bunch of people's opinions on it. Because by getting all these opinions, all these hands on the elephant, you're going to get a much more accurate view of what the history was than just hearing Chris Haueter's single point perspective of a little tiny period of being in Horion's garage when what I call the big split happened.
But we still want to hear about it, Chris.
Well, yeah, and
Well,
I
I'm
think
still going to tell you about it, but
Okay.
like I say, I'm going to preface all of this because I don't want to sound like I'm an authority on Gracie Jiu Jitsu or Machado family because I'm fucking absolutely not. As a matter of fact, most of the time I try to avoid the politics because I didn't want
Unless
to
it has to do with global politics.
yeah,
well,
because I'm not involved.
Right.
I don't want to get involved in the politics where I have to feel the wrath of being involved. Hence, Sun Tzu's Art of War, the first art of war is make no enemies. Make only
first rule?
allies. Only allies. Make no enemies. And I would watch these guys go out and purposefully make enemies,
I see.
which is part of the Gracie Challenge. So in some ways, that was a good thing. Again, I'm a Hegelian Taoist. So I'm not saying that any of these things are bad or good. I'm saying they're
I
fucking
need a dictionary. No.
I would. So that's a great preface, and I appreciate you saying that.
Pontificating prolifically.
I would say that, like for me, for instance,
Pedantically.
I think everybody that goes into this Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu situation, there's an obvious like culture clash that happens even today within the sport. And I think as somebody like myself, who's an American guy that jumped in and experiencing the culture and seeing how things work, it's interesting to me to go, oh, well, here's a guy that has been in it for a really long time and experienced the culture really early when things were probably more intense as far as the difference in cultures and how these things meshed and went together.
I think
and
so.
persisted through it. So it's interesting from that perspective and kind of go like, oh, what did this guy experience and how did he deal with it? And I think the way that you think about these types of things is balanced and healthy. So it's cool to hear. Understanding that, yeah.
I love Renato Laranja. And I know him out of character too. And so in this age where the internet is blowing up, so in the early days, it seemed like every Brazilian you met was introduced as 10-time world champion, this guy fought you this 9-time world champion, Pan Am champion, like all these things, Mundials. So Renato Laranja's character is 18-time world champion.
20th degree black belt.
20th degree black belt.
I thought it was 27.
Or 27, which harkens back to it is clowning on this aspect of the hierarchical culture.
Yeah.
But they also would introduce you that way.
Yes, they would.
So it's just, they are grandiose.
It's grandiose.
They're over the top. And maybe not Brazilian. Let's say Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu culture.
Yeah.
It's over the top. It attracts, and not everybody. It's a generalization. We shouldn't generalize.
I have friends from Brazil that look at that stuff and think it's funny.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Because they know someone like that.
Yeah, they know a lot of people like that. And they're like, oh yeah, I know this.
I know this guy.
I know this type of guy. I've heard that a million times. I know this type of guy.
Absolutely.
But so,
and we can all be that kind of guy.
Yeah.
Or I should say, I
know a lot of American martial arts guys who are very grandiose.
Yes.
Present company, not excluded.
So you show up there. Those are the teachers. You're learning from those guys.
Yep.
And you're gauging the situation. And I guess, What else happened then? And how did
Well,
you get?
all right.
How do we get to having a Machado Academy that's separate? How do we go from
Well,
being
all right.
Keegan Gracie to Keegan Machado?
So my first private I had with Hegan, I was I was under Hoist, and back then, once you were under a guy, that's who you stuck with. And gosh, how do
Hoist gave you your blue belt and your purple belt.
No.
Okay. No.
So
Who gave you your blue belt and your purple belt?
during scheduling, Hegan did.
Oh.
During scheduling, I was looking over Horion's shoulder, and I saw where it said Hegan and Hickson when their private slots were open. And I would say things like, oh, I got a dentist appointment that time. Do you have anything on Wednesday? And because I was trying to get privates with them all, because I'm a Jeet Kune Do guy who wants to absorb what's useful and get something from everything. Anyways, so my first private with Hegan, he's in a little back garage, a private room, which was tiny, like half the size of a one-car garage, and he was having some water. He looked a little tired. And it was the first time I ever saw any weakness. It was almost like I'd caught him by surprise before he could be tough. And I said, I don't remember what it was. And he said, oh, I'm exhausted. I have like 3 privates in a row, my friend. And like I remember that instant, like first impression was, wow, this guy is really humble and very down to earth and not having to be the alpha over me. Whereas, because when I first came, when you filled out an application that asked if you had any experience, I put wrestling, Jeet Kune Do, Muay Thai, all this. They'd think, oh, do you want to challenge us? So I had to, with my shaking knees, be like, no, I'm here to learn. Are you fucking sure? Yes. Okay, my friend. You have to yield. And a lot of Americans at that time would not yield. So that puts me in a place where, God, am I a pussy because I yielded? But then in this other way, it's like I'm Machiavellian. It's like, no, I'm here to learn this art. I'm playing the politics to learn.
Because Mitz Yamashita already kicked your ass.
Mitz Yamashita already proved it worked.
I feel like that. I always think about what, like, my original jiu-jitsu instructor, Pedro Soriano. I always think about how he, at like 17 or 18 or whatever, like picked up from Brazil and moved to California.
Yeah, that's
and
young.
how that's such a big experience to do something like that. Like I can't imagine picking up and just like moving to another country, right? And you don't speak the language that well. You're not used to the culture that much. So I could understand a lot of that.
It's an adventurous spirit.
Yeah, and you get something going like a martial arts studio, and I can understand the inkling or the inclination to go ooh and try to be tough all the time and try to hold yourself to be tough like that, to try to like be secure in what you're doing. So
here's a little
I understand
story.
that situation.
So I remember I took Hegan to the Vaughn's market. And of course, like typical Brazilian, he's buying all this fruit. There's like watermelons, cantaloupes, bananas, and this big bag of grapes. And while we're walking in the aisle, he's eating grapes. And some employee with a Vaughn's apron, who was a dude who looked like a kind of tough guy, he's like, hey man, you got to pay for those. And like that, like little class, like Hegan wanted to kick this guy's ass. And then this guy kept aggravating. And I'm like, Hegan, you can't fight the guy. You don't have a green card yet. And he's like, what did this guy say to me, Chris? What did he say? And he was talking shit. And he would look back talking shit. And I wanted to run over the guy and say, dude, you have no fucking idea who you're talking shit to. You're going to get your fucking ass kicked. And then half of me wanted to see it because he kept talking shit while we're checking out. And Hegan, because he couldn't quite understand the English, he didn't realize the guy was talking shit. And then as we're leaving, the guy even said, what, you don't fucking speak English? Like accusing him of being illegal.
Yeah.
And then it was like one of those things like, oh, fuck.
Yeah.
It's like, you are about to get your clock. And the only thing that stopped him is I went, Hegan, if you get in a fight, you can't get your green card.
Nice.
And he was like, fucking all right, let's get out of here.
Yeah, I mean, people are punks, right? So when someone new comes around,
Yep.
people get punked. It's like how it goes. So I understand them wanting to be tough like that.
Yeah.
But
You're
anyway,
in a new country, new culture, that is totally unlike yours. You see the way American and European, I mean, Americans think European men look fucking passive. I don't want to use the term anymore because it's politically incorrect. But like, you could see how they see us as these pussified men, whereas they're
Is
real
that
men.
politically correct?
Well, that's not politically correct either.
All right.
You see, now we're at
Why don't we just say weak?
weak men. Weak
them,
men.
yeah.
Like, I remember when Chance and I first walked on a Rio beach. We've got our board shorts on, these two white dudes thinking we're like LA beach cool, and every dude is in a black mankini. It was shocking. And here we are standing out like a
Speedo.
turd in a punch bowl with a neon light.
Really, really white and gingerish men
Yeah.
in
In
board shorts.
board shorts where
With
there's
a,
all
with a
these
bunch of tan,
jiu-jitsu
muscly,
guys
Speedo wearing
with
hot
banged up
guys.
ears. I'd already seen the like Hickson fight on the beach, so I've got that image in my mind. I'm a new black belt. I'm like, fuck, I could get in a fight. Jesus Christ, on the beach. And yeah, the culture was definitely a different than it is now. It still has elements of that throughout. We all know. Remember in the early days, you remember, it seemed like almost every competition, a fight would break out in the stands or outside.
Or with referees.
Or referees, yeah. Fights were much more common.
Yeah.
And I remember one of the guys who regularly filmed all the matches, I told him once, because I think I'm a good artist and director, and I would say, if you want a story, the story's in the fucking stands. Watch when the fight breaks out in stands and get that camera off the controlled point jiu-jitsu match and get it in the piss-off between two rival black belts and their schools that started gang fight in the parking lot. That's where the fucking entertainment is.
Yeah.
So you kind of found yourself connecting with Keegan and taking classes from him at the garage.
And you started helping him, right?
Well, this is the thing. Yes, I helped him, but all of the Gracies and Machados were always very cool to me.
Yeah.
I never felt like any of them were uncool. So for me, when the big split was happening, it was kind of heartbreaking.
I bet.
Because I wanted them all to be together. I remember once after Hickson had his first competition, which was maybe 2 years after he wasn't talking with Horian anymore. The Machados weren't speaking with Horian anymore. Hoist was loyal to Horian. He had this comp. Machados came. Joe Moreira came. All Hickson's guys. And I remember talking outside of the comp with a couple of the Hickson guys I knew, guys who went with Hickson, guys who went, we were all like, God, it's too bad we can't still all train together. Because that was kind of how it was then as well. And so Hegan was the first, and I want to say the second brother that came was Carlos. I could be wrong. And I want to say Jean-Jacques or Hodger was the last. I remember.
What about John?
I remember when John came, and here's why I remember. I always say, out of the Machados, if you look at it like a band, the Beatles, you've got the skeleton, you've got the muscles, you've got the heart, you've got the soul. Like, they have all those analogies, right? Like, Hegan was the heavyweight, the pressure game athlete. Jean-Jacques was the magician. John Machado was the all-around phenomenal athlete. Like, fucking phenomenal athlete. Like, ripped, could do all the athletics, should have done MMA if he wanted to. Fast hands, won like brown belt worlds and then stopped competing after that. Jean-Jacques loved to compete, is the one who obviously kept it up all the way into Abu Dhabi and also. Hodger was the like more spiritual one who would blend yoga and jiu-jitsu.
The happy one.
Carlos
always had a smile on his face.
Well, Carlos was definitely the intellectual powerhouse of the family. And I would say the ones whose jiu-jitsu most is like Hickson's. They're almost the same kind. Very technical, very much a blend of the pressure game, nothing fancy, do what works, the micro adjustments of it, right? So each of them had their own flavor. And each of the Gracies I knew, because I didn't know them all, had their own flavor. When I met Henzo, he was a brown belt being partially coached by Hegan. But because he's a Gracie, you go get your black belt back in Brazil from the Mafia Don, because that's how the hierarchy works. And I remember realizing that. And I was a purple belt, Henzo's a brown belt, Hegan's a black belt. We're in Hegan's garage, we're training, and I would frequently overhear, and although I can't speak it, I could sort of understand when they're talking about that's a Horion. Horion, they're saying, oh, come on, she's a Horion. You know, like I could tell shit was being talked.
Yeah.
Right? And I knew the riff was getting worse.
Yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
How far between that garage, wherever that garage was, and this training spot?
So,
what's the timeline?
okay.
When did it become this training spot?
This training spot on Avenue D, Hegan's garage is on Avenue A, 3 blocks away. Horion's garage is on Red Beam, near like where Woods Hardware is, over there. So I could walk or ride my skateboard to either garage.
But this garage right here on
Wasn't a garage, it was a backyard.
It was a backyard, and
I
you
built
lived
a
in
deck
the house.
because at that time I built a deck, and I was doing Kali, Bajit Kundo. I had a Wing Chun.
So you were training back here.
Yes, I had a pommel horse, and we got some wet wrestling mats from South High that I'd heard a rumor were rolled up near the trash can. Now, were they trash or not? I don't know, but we went over and we fucking got them. And we had these green wrestling mats, which when you first moved here, we still had chunks of them.
Yes.
That we would use as mats, because mats were hard to get back then. Just like in the 1970s, wetsuits were hard to fucking get. I'm still blown away when I walk into Albertsons or Costco and you could buy a fucking wetsuit for $30.
Okay.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, they have volleyballs and wetsuits and sandals. It's like, it's like, to me, when I was young, wetsuits were rare. Having a skateboard was rare.
Yeah.
So you put mats back here, but the Machados didn't train here. Just
Not
you
yet.
trained here. Okay, so then what happened?
So they hadn't departed yet. So do you think that they got a taste of American business stuff, and then they were like, oh, we want to go do our own thing in the way that a lot of Americans kind of roll?
There's a little bit of that. So back when I started, it was $20 a private. And Hegan got $5 of that, and Horion got $15. And Horion's plan was to build the big giant academy. So all these instructors, you're going to have to sacrifice for a while until we get the big thing going. Hegan and Hickson weren't down with Horion's sacrifice for whatever reason. Now, part of it's probably because Haleo, Carlos was still alive as well. They were getting so old, and we're back in Brazil, that the command structure was fragmenting. So anyway,
Can you tell me that?
Yes.
Can you answer that question?
I can't.
There's a big falling out. I'm a purple belt. I fall in love
With?
my now ex-wife.
Oh, you were in love with her?
I didn't marry her for her money.
Oh.
Okay, so
I thought you just had like this weird...
I thought you were just dumb.
Yeah, I thought you just had this weird
okay, let me ask you out there
relationship.
in
I thought she convinced you to marry her.
let me ask you guys this. Have you ever been in a relationship in high school where you thought you were madly in love, but you look back on it and realized it was puppy love, what they call it, right?
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
All right.
Definitely.
So
Bad. Traumatizing.
we fall in love
Puppy
for
love?
various reasons, and she is going into the Navy through AOCS and then going to become a pilot in the Navy. So I say this relationship isn't going to work because I'm really attached to my home and jiu-jitsu and everything going on here. But what if we get married? It'll work. And I say, what if we got engaged? Yeah, let's get engaged. I thought you get engaged and, that shit can go on for 5 years. I heard people being engaged. That meant a date. Her mom set a date, and it was fucking like 6 months away.
That
And it was
same
like,
thing happened when you asked me to marry you.
I know.
My mom went and found a venue and set a date.
But I wanted to get married then.
Okay.
And
but
I'm not saying I didn't love her. But we both were kind of it was almost like the marriage happened too fast for us both. And we were really good friends. We were definitely intellectually but compatible. She was brilliant, like
She could read a book so fast.
yes. She
So
was
brilliant.
very bright,
She
smart.
knew so many words. Didn't need an encyclopedia.
And never talk about an ex in front of your current relationship. So I'm trying to avoid this fucking
Hey,
part.
I've heard all these stories. You say it, I already know.
Because you guys want to know why fucking the Machados
Yes,
moved
I
in
want
here.
to know, and it's fine because I already know all this.
All right.
That's why I'm saying
Wait, let's
I know
go back.
about her.
Let's go back to a separate fork in the road, and then you can choose a different path
All right,
if you'd like.
Jesus
No,
Christ.
this is good.
So
I
there's
like
still.
this story.
Why did they go do their own business? I'm sure it had nothing to do with your.
Were
ex.
they even doing a business, Tobin?
All right.
They weren't doing a business. I bet they didn't have a DBA. I bet they didn't have. It wasn't a business.
Why did they choose to stop teaching
Let me
at a
tell you.
Horian's garage? Yeah.
So, a couple weeks after I had a little challenge fight in Hegan's garage, and I became one of Hegan's main helpers in the garage. So he would have a private against maybe with some dude with stinky breath or whatever it was, and he would use me as the dummy. Mm-hmm. So I'm learning with jiu-jitsu for free. And I'm one of Hegan's better guys. Me, the Bass brothers, a couple of us went with Hegan when the split happened. Some stayed at Horion when he opened up his new academy. But just before he'd opened his new academy, one day I showed up and the mats in Hegan's garage were gone. And I asked him what had happened. And Hegan looked really worried and concerned, the way an underboss might when the Mafia Don is about to greenlight your ass. Mm-hmm. It was like one of those things that was pretty intense. And I remember he said, my cousin Hickson's on his way over. We have to have a talk. And like I thought, shit, there's going to be a fight. And I remember this fairly heated conversation between Hegan and Hickson with, yo, shut the boat, the Horion. Then I said, fucking Horion. You see, come on. They hug it out. Hickson goes, and Hegan says, we're on our own. So, like, I have to say, wow, I was there the moment the fucking
Machado
happened.
started, Machado Academy.
And so I went and helped Hegan get mats. But now here's me, little Machiavellian me. I'm signed up and prepaid at Horion's new opening academy for like 4 months. So I'm showing up at both places. That was when Horion had microphones in the locker room and had ears to find out who was training in their own garages and all that kind of stuff, because you had to keep that on the way down low. And this was also before the internet, right? Cue in Hanato Laranja's 21-time fucking whatever, right? This was all in that period. I remember the juice bar at the old Gracie Academy and Haleo being behind it making people juices. Like I say, my very first experience walking in Horion's house, he made me a juice. And it was wonderful. Something about fucking Brazilians in their juice, or jiu-jitsu Brazilians, or whatever. And I'm not going to go down this road because that's another thing. But anyways,
Can we go back to your wife and you fell in love? And your wife...
No, we're not going to go down that fucking road.
Because you moved out to Florida, and that's how Hegan ended up living
Yes.
here. You have to tell that part. Why would you just leave it hanging?
Because I'm not there yet.
Oh.
I'm still at the part where the big split happens, which I think the audience is more interested than my relationship.
No, I want to know how Hegan ended up living in this house.
That's what it leads to.
Go ahead.
So, then because I'm getting married and she's going to flight school, there's like 3 phases where like all the pilots go through one school where you train on like a T-34 trainer plane. Then you're split whether you get jets, props, or helos. And then a pipeline moves you, and it's by needs of the Navy, just like everything. And she got helicopters, which she didn't want. She wanted jets or props because she wanted to become an airline pilot like her dad. That's a whole other fucking long story. This is why I don't want to go down this thing. But anyways, I had just gotten out of the Marine Corps Reserves and transferred to an Army National Guard SF unit in Provo, Utah, which I used to drive out to. And then I found out in Mobile, Alabama, which was an hour away from Pensacola, was 20th Special Forces Group, which also gave me incentive to get married. Wrong reasons to get married. We both had wrong reasons.
Yeah, all
So
good.
that's all happening. I'm gone for 2.5 years. And during that period of time, I rent out. My dad owned it, but we needed renters, so I rented out to the Machados. And then I had a deck back here,
Right here.
and the first thing they did was just build a frame over a deck and put up plastic tarp. So the first Machado Academy was back here. When I left, well, Carlos was in my wedding, and when I left, the Machados had all finally moved here. When I wanted to talk more about that than my fucking marriage. But
So my fault you were married?
Yeah, the marriage didn't last long. We weren't with each other very much. We only lived with each other, I think, a total of 6 months in that whole 2 years, because she would be at sea or doing this, and I would be off over here. And what I would do, because I'm dying to do jiu-jitsu.
Yeah.
So I find myself in Pensacola, Florida, in a reserve unit in Alabama before UFC, and I'm a purple belt jonesing like a crack addict to fucking roll. So I started my own jiu-jitsu class, and I purposefully went to the Jeet Kune Do Club, the Karate Club, the Aikido Club, and the Navy Judo Club on the base with the intent to poach students because I'd seen how it works.
OG poacher.
OG poacher. And I successfully took the Jeet Kune Do Club, which was run by this super cool guy named Kirk, who was really impressed that I'd trained at the Machado Academy. Wow, you know more than me. Why don't you take the club over? Okay, guess what? We're going to do jiu-jitsu now.
Wait, so all that's going down.
Yeah.
He's there.
The Machados
they're
are
here.
living here.
They're
in the
living
house.
here.
All of them.
And
in the
I'm
house.
jealous and
In
envious.
780 square feet, all 5 of them? Or
Yep.
no? All 5 of them?
All 5 of them.
Oh, that probably stank. And they're sweaty geese and they didn't wash them?
That was back
probably
before they
delicious
washed
juice.
gees. And
You just hang them out to dry?
Imagine the
and
juice
there
bar.
was specific ritualistic ways to hang your gi, like the lapel had to face the ocean. I don't remember what it was, but there were weird things. There was weird cultures. Macumba. You guys ever heard of Macumba?
Black magic, I have from you.
Look up Macumba.
Black magic, right?
The original magic kimono was going to be Macumba. And part of it is when you wore it, when you stepped on a scale, you would actually weigh 2 pounds less.
Oh.
So you got to eat if you got the magic kimono. That was going to be my whole marketing campaign and my artwork and all that
insane.
stuff. So if in this podcast you want to zoom up at that piece of art, True Jiu-Jitsu Adventure, that's the 1990s vision of what a 1960s men's magazine would be about what it was like kind of in the olden days.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay,
One.
so
The
5
garage
Machados living here, training with plastic tarps
Yes.
So I've seen
and a
that.
deck.
And
Have you
every
seen that?
chance I could fly back and train, I would. Then I find myself in Imperial Beach when I follow her career towards the ass end of our marriage, and I'm training with Nelson Montero, who is training out of his garage
in San Diego,
in San Clemente, or not San. What is
Oceanside.
close to there. I remember I had to drive an hour and a half through traffic to get to the place from Imperial Beach, which is the last county before
Mexico.
Mexico, yes. And so when I was a purple belt, I was training at Montero Academy, and some weekends I would come up to train with the Machados. And I remember when they opened up their first Hole in the Wall Academy.
And is that the Hole in the Wall Academy? There's like that famous thing that Keegan and John Jock and everybody posts where it's like, Google started here, Apple started here, and it shows these garages, and then it's like Machado Jiu Jitsu, and it's like a
Yes.
humble little building. That's the first
That's
building.
the Hole in the Wall Academy.
So this is pre.
Which I
the Hole in
nicknamed
the
it
Wall.
the Hole in the Wall Academy.
Okay.
Because it was a room about this large, no windows, one door. And it was a fucking fire hazard. There'd be like 30 of us fucking rolling in there with one door and the steamy fucking
It's a good thing
room
you
and-
guys were young, or you'd be stroking out.
Yep. Yep. So yeah,
No AED.
that was that really cool period, which all you purple belts out there in purple belt land, cherish your purple belt phase, because when you're in it, it seems like it sucks, but when you're out of it, you're like, God, that was the best jiu-jitsu phase.
Oh yeah, it was
That
the best. Mine was awesome.
that seasoned blue through you first get your brown. That's like the best phase of jiu-jitsu.
Okay, so they moved out of here, and when you moved back, they moved out.
It just so happened that when my marriage ended, they had finally had a big enough academy, made enough money to where they didn't have to sleep 5 brothers in a tiny house anymore. Carlos slept in that room,
In the cottage.
in the cottage,
Chris and I lived when we first met.
which I had fixed up. And I would live in there and I would rent out the front house. And I'd rented it out from everybody to ex-cons to cops to
The
strippers.
That's
And
who lived here when I moved in.
when I here's a funny story. So there was this stripper who was my roommate, but 2 of them. And I'd been on my second or third date with Melissa, and she was coming over, and I knew she was coming over. And through the kitchen window, somehow this stripper chick was talking about jiu-jitsu or had seen MMA. And right as Melissa pulls up, she's doing a flying guard on me.
That was a stripper from Oregon. That wasn't your
Oh, that
roommate.
was the Oregon stripper. Okay.
Was she a stripper too?
She was.
Okay,
I think so.
Some girl from Oregon
Yes.
was doing that, and then I backed up my car and actually hit the person because I was like,
She's like, what the fuck? God.
That's amazing.
It's amazing that our marriage survived. It's amazing our
that
relationship.
has nothing to
Through
do
all
with
kinds of
Machados.
shit.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with Machados. Your marriage has a lot to do with Machados.
journey.
They were in the wedding.
Yeah.
So, okay, so they got their own academy going,
Yeah.
and it was all 5 brothers teaching at that one academy.
I want to say that was like 93-ish.
Okay.
And during that phase, from like basically 91 to 99 was what I call the Cambrian explosion in terms of jiu-jitsu.
And I was in middle school, high school, and start of college.
Yeah.
The internet is now an underground thing. People are finding out about it. Gracie Challenge is there still, but starting to get to be harder to pull off because people are getting clued in. It was during my purple belt phase while I was instructing and in Army Reserves and Guard, all that, where I realized jiu-jitsu is a technology. It's a tech. And if you have the tech, you're gonna probably win the fight. And at that time, as a purple belt, I felt like I had an AR and these other guys had muskets. Could a musket fucking kill you? Yeah, 50 caliber lead ball hitting you in the face is gonna fucking kill you. But they got one shot. And if you cannot get hit or killed on that one shot, you're gonna win the fight. So back then, I would do little challenges too. And sometimes and there are 2 challenge fights I had back there that I didn't really necessarily want to have, but they kind of happened organically. And I remember one of the things that Horion talked to me about when I was a new blue belt, and I didn't realize what he was actually asking until I'd walked out of the thing. So Chris, you fought Muay Thai, you like to fight, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, I like to fight. I don't want to say no, I don't like to fight, right?
You've been fighting since you were a baby.
Yeah, I've been fighting all the time. Okay, good. So if we need you, and I'm like, yeah, if you need me. And then I walk out and realize, oh, fuck, I just volunteered
Signed
to
up.
be a guy on fucking call for a challenge fight. And Hegan knew that. And there was a time where Hegan called me over to his garage, and I had one. But so I find myself in the Pensacola, and that was where I would go to the judo club to get the closest thing I could to the jiu-jitsu. And I would destroy these guys in Newaza, and I would learn the judo, which is an awesome fucking art. And then the guys who I had, I would teach them the jiu-jitsu. And the karate club, they met and finished their club thing on a campus just before my jiu-jitsu club time slot began, which one of my students who I'd recruited out of the Aikido club was a junior in college there and knew how to get the club and quickly got me a club so we can officially have a mat time slot. Thank God for him, because I don't have those organizational skills. He pulled it off. I'm pre-med at the time, listening to these fucking snobs like, well, what'd you get on that? Okay, do your own work. It's like, f you, I'm gonna you in a and you I'm gonna go
Woo!
God.
Cobra Kai!
Cobra Kai, yeah.
Cobra Kai!
Yeah, I love Cobra Kai. I know that the people who write that either do jujitsu or understand the culture, because they fucking do
Totally.
it so well.
Yeah, it was the best show.
How the little piss-offs can turn into... So a couple little piss-offs turned into challenge fights on that university college mat room with little tiny crowds of people watching them. No one had a fucking camera back then because people didn't have phones and all that stuff. You had to get a VHS camera and bring it in, so that was lost.
Yeah.
Which is too bad.
Okay, so then you get back to California again.
And I'm a purple belt.
You're a purple belt.
And I am expecting that after 2 years of sporadic training, actually, after a year and a half, when I got to Imperial Beach, I was training regularly at Nelson Montero's Academy, which I was there the day the Prince came in. He met the Prince the next week. He got his $1 million deal and fucking left the academy to...
I thought it was a garage.
The garage. Well, the garage was the academy.
Okay.
To Marcelo, who was my fellow purple belt Brazilian guy. Him and I were neck and neck and fought and stuff, and we came up through the ranks together. He ended up having an academy later on. But anyways, when I got back, I realized that in that time that I was gone, by teaching, my jiu-jitsu had gotten better. Mm-hmm. So it didn't either stay in stasis or decline, that it had actually improved, which is also one of those phenomenons. They say it's true with language, with riding a bike and all that, is like once you get to a certain phase, it's not going to go away. And in some ways, breaks can make it better. Because then you come back...
Just don't break a bone.
Yeah. Because the knowledge you have then is more pure and refined. There's not the confusion of, like, do I really know? Let me try that spider guard thing. I don't really know how it works. Like, you do what works then after a break, right? But so when I returned, I was still a good purple belt. And I was the same as my other fellow peers who were all progressing through the ranks. And then it wasn't but a few years later where all of a sudden we're getting black belts. And like I say, I got a black belt because I was at the right place, right time.
Where were you when you got your black belt?
In Hegan's Hole in the Wall School.
Wait, where'd you get your brown belt?
Machado from Hegan.
At the Hole in the Wall School?
Nelson Montero, your purple belt, he took off.
He was my purple belt instructor for the bulk of my purple belt phase. Uh-huh. Then my marriage finally ended, and I returned to L.A.
To live in the cottage.
The Machados had moved out. Uh-huh. It just so happened the same month my marriage ended, they had moved out. I asked my pops, can I move in, find roommates? I move in the cottage, rent out the front house. Within a couple months, I get my brown belt. I get my, as Chance would say, my marriage ended. I got my balls back, and I'm back in play.
Chance. Oh, Chance. We love Chance.
Where's Chance these days?
Chance
Singapore.
is running an academy in Singapore.
Okay, so you got your brown belt.
Me and Chance are OG jiu-jitsu buddies in the early days.
Hell yeah. So you came back, and then you're training at the Machados at their Hole in the Wall.
At the Hole in the Wall
and
Academy.
That's where you got your brown belt.
Yep.
And his balls.
And then
and my
it was
balls
all
back.
5 brothers teaching there, right?
Yep.
How was their structure as far as how the brothers all got along, and what was the hierarchy?
They got along very well then.
They seem like they really love each other and have a nice, like...
Yep.
Yeah.
And
They're loving.
They were good pals with Chuck Norris, who helped them open up the Valley School.
Okay. And then Chris tapped Chuck Norris out.
I did
leave that out.
Oh, yeah.
Chris tapped Chuck Norris out.
Of course.
Really important information. Armbar, right?
It is. So when Chuck was getting his purple belt, they brought me up there to help Iron Man him. Uh-huh. Because, like, really, I got the Iron Man kind of from wrestling and kind of from the Machados that didn't really do it all the time, but a little bit. And to test Chuck. Mm-hmm. And I armbarred Chuck. And That was before all the Chuck memes, right?
Yeah.
And I
We
used
need
to
a
think,
Chuck meme.
I'd just be like, fuck, I wish I had a video of that. So I'm the guy who
meme.
fucking armbarred Chuck Norris.
Yeah.
Him on the pod.
Oh yeah,
let's get
Chuck, come on
down here.
come on the pod, Chuck.
But Chuck's actually a really cool fucking guy.
How could he not be?
Super cool
Yeah.
dude. Not tall, like a lot of actors, which is another reason why I think I should be an actor. I'm not tall.
I'm not tall either.
Looks big on film. Has really strong fucking arms.
Yeah.
And really could do a back fucking spin kick from hell. Just
Oh,
like,
yeah, he's sick.
whoosh,
Yeah.
just whoosh, knock your fucking head off with
So-
a back spin kick.
So when was it the Valley? So Chuck, was that their first like famous student that they had?
Certainly publicly first famous student. They
And
had.
then he helped them open the Valley School, and that's
Valley
kind of when
School,
they.
and then Chuck moved to keep filming something, moved to Dallas, which is where he's from, and took Carlos with him
Oh.
to be his private instructor
That's
and
how
helped
Carlos
him open
ended
up
up in Texas.
an academy. And then
Okay.
Carlos ended
So
up in
Jean
Dallas.
Jacques ended up in the Valley. Carlos ended up in Texas. John
and Hegan,
and Hegan
still
and Hodger.
and Hodger still were running the L.A.
I
things
see those stickers
together.
on cars every once in a while. It's like RJC.
RCJ.
RCJ.
Yeah.
That was that school? The three of them?
Yeah, but it
RCJ
should-
stands for all of them. That's all five brothers, right? Because Hegan,
Yes.
John Jack, and John,
And
and
I
Carlos,
used to say
and Hodger.
it
Those-
shouldn't
that's
be
RCJ.
3.
It's
You
a
need to
share.
have 5 but their math wasn't that good or whatever it was.
RRCJJJ?
But JJ. But JJ.
It was cool times.
But then, so did they move from Hole in the Wall School over to 190th?
That
Or-
was 190th came fairly later.
Fairly later.
I was a
That's
black
when I
belt
came.
for a
I
while.
came in. You were a second degree black belt, and
Yeah.
I was new when they were
Yeah.
at 190th.
Yes.
So they went to a couple different locations because I remember John had a school over on Hawthorne.
Yes.
And then it was just Hodger and Hegan over on 190th.
Yes.
And so you were at the Hole in the Wall.
Artesia was the other school. They
That
had.
came after
That came-
190th. With
Brown belt
Hodger
was
and
that
Hegan.
Hole in the Wall, and then where did you tend to as the brothers kind of separated off and went to their own things, right? Like one went
Yep.
to Texas, one went to
Yep.
Hollywood area, one went to Valley. Where did you train? In
And
your
I
town?
trained at Bob Bass's school because Bob Bass opened South Bay Jiu Jitsu.
I see.
And I was one of the things that for whatever it is, maybe it's my personality, maybe it's my Machiavellian nature, but I'm pretty good at not making enemies. So I would be pretty welcome at a bunch of different spots.
Yeah.
I even strived to be welcome at Horion's Gracie Academy.
Yeah.
I really did want, because seriously, each of these places had an element that was really fucking good
Yeah.
and valuable to get. And I have Jeet Kune Do mindset, which says, be open-minded to everything, absorb what is useful, disregard what doesn't work for you. And that is
Take
my
what you like and leave
mindset.
the rest.
Yep, my philosophy of life, which is comes a lot. And you know who else had that? The Stoics, who inspired the people that did alcohol and drug recovery. Is based on the philosophy
Stoicism.
of Stoicism, which is
Personal responsibility.
personal responsibility, anti-victim mindset. Take control of your own life. Don't rely on a mentor, yet seek them out. So at the same time, you want to have a mentor. You don't want to be in the master-slave relationship, which was talked about by one of the postmodernists. Was it not Adorno and Horkheimer, but not Baudrillard, not one of those philosophers.
Hegelian dialectic.
No, not Hegel. Hegel was 200 years before the.
I just had to say
postmodern.
that because you say that all the time.
I know, too much. I said.
Machiavelli.
Wait, so then your black belt came from Hegan.
Yes,
After you came back from the cop
Yes.
stuff, you were
No, it was
at
before
South
the
Bay.
cop stuff.
before the cop stuff.
He got his
Okay.
black belt before the cop stuff.
I
Cop
used to
stuff
teach
didn't
cops.
happen
I used to teach
till he was
at
35.
Keegan School in the morning, and I taught a bunch of cops who were undercover cops. And I always wanted to be a cop. And I was going through fucking nursing school, which I hated. Every semester, I hated it more and more.
Yeah.
My final semester, I'm doing my ER rotation because you got to pick which area you wanted to do. I don't want to do fucking pediatrics or OBGYN, right? I'm fucking, I'll do ER.
Yeah.
And I remember helping two female LAPD cops hold down an unruly guy they're wheeling in on a fucking gurney, and call it misogyny, whatever it was, I said, this is all fucking backwards. I should have their job. They should have fucking mine. I'm going to go be a cop.
Yeah.
Fuck this nursing shit.
Wait, so what school did you get what school were you in when you were awarded your black belt?
Was it a hole in the wall?
Hole in the wall. So you went brown and black at the hole in the wall.
I think he was like 31 when he got his black belt. He didn't become a cop till he was 35. I know the chronology a bit.
And then
it happened the same year I turned 30, I believe, or 31. It was, or maybe it was
1996.
I changed.
You were about
my
to be
birthday's
32,
December
homie.
27th.
1964.
Okay, that's when it was.
And then
You were almost 32.
God, what a wonderful. The 30s are your best time, like your purple belt.
I was also almost 32 when I got my black belt.
Your 20s are your blue belt. Your 30s are your purple belt. Your 40s are your brown belt. 50s are your black belt.
Okay, whatever that means.
So you were kind of going to visit different brothers then at that time, maybe Hole in the Wall. No, you're all trained at Hole in the
He
Wall.
was in Redondo.
And when you came back from being a cop,
a bit
then
I
you kind
would
of go around.
move around it a bit, but mostly I would train at
South Bay.
Like for my brown and black belt, I would train at the Hole in the Wall, but the Hole in the Wall broke up. And sometimes I would train at a Bob school. Sometimes I would train at Hegan School on 190th. Sometimes I would train with other people in their garages, because garages were starting to pop up again. Because there was a lot of piss-offs between different academies.
Sure.
There was this one cool place called Neutral Grounds, which was such a cool name, right?
Is it still out there? That's still
I don't
a name.
think
That name's being
they
used.
would have backyard MMA matches, backyard grappling thing, because this is still the early phase of MMA, where there was a lot of backyard brawling still. And over in Europe, it's called unlicensed boxing, which a guy, Richie, made those two brilliant films, which are great, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, and the other one about unlicensed boxing. I can't think of the fucking name. I'm not great at names. The one with Brad Pitt in it. I'll do the Fight for Free.
Yeah.
Fight Club?
No, not Fight Club.
I'll do the Fight for Free. He plays in the Caravan. I'll fight you in the Caravan.
I'm the worst with movies.
So that was when Guy was a new blue belt. He had made that, which was one of the first things of that captures that early jiu-jitsu culture. But instead of having it MMA, it was unlicensed boxing.
I see. So when did Hegan sort of start to be like the jiu-jitsu instructor of the stars? I feel like he has a lot of... He's
Way
like the
later.
guy that's
Way
like
later. Way later.
First he was down here in Redondo, then he decided he didn't want to be here in Redondo anymore, and he wanted to be an actor, and he was working on his English and his pronunciation, and he was doing these things, and he was less and less at the academy here in Redondo, and
It was very common when I would show up to Hegan's class to get instruction. He would say, "Oh, great, you're here, take the class." So basically, I became, me and a couple other guys, the main instructors. Several times over the years, I would become the main instructor at Hegan's Academy, which I didn't really mind. I mean,
you were teaching at Artesia during the time when I was about a purple belt. You were teaching twice a week there. And then one day we showed up and someone else was teaching the class, because I guess Hegan had sold the academy.
He sold the academy. And had he asked me, I would have bought it.
Yeah.
And I remember him...
someone who didn't speak English.
About a month earlier, I remember him coming up as I taught, and he says, "Grease is a great class. Your class is here's great. I just want to let you know, we're having a partner come along. He'll be here in a while, blah, blah." And I remember thinking, why is he telling me this? And then when that guy showed up, I'm like, oh, he sold the school to him. So then that guy, as soon as he was in control of school, of course, he fires me. which was like within
You
minutes.
couldn't get fired. You weren't really hired.
I wasn't really hired.
We weren't on payroll or anything. We just
It's like
there.
now this is our class now.
We got
it isn't
kicked
yours
out.
anymore. Yes.
And rules started shifting, even like with the women's class, and
Yes,
yeah, it
that's
just started
right.
getting weird. And I think
There was
like
a piss off between Jean-Jacques guys. Jean-Jacques didn't want his...
wouldn't let his guys come down and train with us anymore because we were we had like a small people's group, and they weren't allowed to come down and train with us anymore, so we couldn't do that.
And so back in those pre-days, I used to run the first women's the jiu-jitsu class.
This is way before all
Not self-defense, but a women's class. And of course, just like nightclubs where the women are, the men start to show up. So after a while, on Sundays, there would always be a bunch of dudes that would show up. Hey, can we train on the side matter? Because really they want to hit on the girls, right? Whatever. But that was when Eddie Bravo came back as a blue belt, and they would come down on Sundays, and Sundays at Hegan School was always kind of a cool, eclectic mix of people. Whether it was a little women's class going on or some MMA guys going on.
No little women's classes, but maybe you taught a little women's class.
Mine was little.
Okay.
At one point, I had like almost 9 girls.
But that was, you had women. But that was when you were a brown belt. When you were a brown belt, that's when that was going on. So that must have been a hole in the wall
new black belt. It wasn't the hole in the wall.
Yeah,
you're
that
right.
was way before we had our Sunday thing.
That was at the hole in the wall academy.
Because that was like, we're talking about in the early 2000s. Cindy was already a black belt.
Yes.
And Eddie Bravo was coming around to the hole in the wall, or at Hegan's?
No, he came to the 190th one, if I remember right. But my memory isn't that great.
It's all hodgepodge.
Interesting. And yeah, it seems like, and Jean-Jacques just doing his thing the whole time.
So Jean-Jacques was in the valley, Tarzana, right? Jean-Jacques way out in Tarzana. When the school transferred ownership in Redondo, Hodger, I think, went out to Pasadena and had something in Pasadena.
He did, yep.
And then that's when Hegan started hanging out in Hollywood and eventually teamed up, I think, with some other discipline. What was that thing? The Academy? There's some other discipline.
The thing that Manami
Russian
does, right?
Russian.
Sistema.
Right, Sistema. He had his thing with the Sistema person, and I think that's more when he started doing being the teacher to the stars. And I think he trained Ashton Kutcher and Wesley Snipes and
Michael Kroger.
And even Scarlett Johansson.
Yes.
Scarlett Johansson.
Michael Kroger of Nickelback.
Okay, Michael Kroger and
I don't think Michael
went up there once.
What about Keanu? Does he train Keanu too?
I went up there once years ago to meet with Hegan and to teach his class. And Hegan came with Mickey Rourke. And, Chris, can you teach the class? And I met Mickey Rourke, and they went off and ate while I taught the class.
Yeah, so Hegan became...
So what does he have for a school now? Because there is like a school that
the Academy.
That's the Academy. That's
Beverly Hills, right?
That's Beverly Hills Jiu-Jitsu.
Beverly Hills.
That's where I wanna be.
This is Beverly Hills Jiu-Jitsu. Is Hegan's Academy?
No. Beverly Hills Jiu-Jitsu is a different
the
place.
Academy.
The Academy is where Hegan teaches that.
And that's the general population that trains under him, and then he does the private.
I have no idea.
I'm sure there's a lot of regular people, and I'm sure he probably does a lot of privates with the famous people.
Yes.
I'm sure. I would just assume.
Yeah.
Okay.
Except I know somebody, Eddie, was rolling with Wesley Snipes and didn't realize it was.
Yeah, there's clearly there was that period, I want to say it was 10 years ago, which people use the reference, but jiu-jitsu jumped the shark, which goes back to Happy Days, where Fonzie does a water skiing jump over a shark, something that... It became a meme that only older Gen Xers and boomers know.
Yeah.
But...
Fonzie.
But jiu-jitsu had jumped the shark. It had gone mainstream.
Yeah.
I always say I remember 3 distinct phases of it, just like in comic books. You have the Golden Age, the Silver Age, and stuff. There's like movies have that. There was definitely like what I call the pre-UFC phase, the first phase post-UFC, the sport blowing up phase, then the mainstreamification. And those overlap, and if you drew 3 lines, you could split them apart in distinct ages that this martial art has gone through. And I was not there with the Golden Age. The Golden Age is in Brazil.
Yeah.
That's all Carlos, Helio, their challenge fights, the big Kimura fights, going through pre-World War II, the rise of fascism, what was Jiu-Jitsu doing then, the coups in Brazil, all that's the Golden Age. Then the Silver Age is when it comes to America. And the Silver Age culminates as it becomes global, and now is a global phenomenon. And there was a period of time when I was a purple belt where you could take a college wrestler, the toughest operator, throw $20 on the ground, say you won't last a minute. They'd say, what, this little dude, I'll be in him, and you could line up a room. And I remember when that shift happened, where you could no longer line up a room, where it seemed like everybody was suddenly arm lock aware, choke aware. You're slipping over to my back, even if they didn't train. It was in the zeitgeist. It had penetrated the collective unconscious, if you are a Jungian or Lacanian philosophy believer.
Well, all right.
Interesting. So just to draw back to the Machados. So basically today, Higin's doing his thing, the academy, private classes. John Jock's got his school.
In the
He's
Valley.
got a really healthy
very
school.
successful school.
Tarzana.
Amazing information online from him.
Jean-Jacques is like, if you want to say, like, I mean, and I'm going to use analogies, and analogies always break down because it's a fucking analogy, but Jean-Jacques is like grappling water. He's absolutely smooth.
Beautiful.
A
watching him train.
master of getting you off balance, getting under your base, having you fall into a lock. Like, brilliant at that. Higan developed the pressure game. I saw Higan teach the pressure game to guys that later went on and became world fucking champions and never gave Higan credit.
Yeah.
Like, he really did develop the pressure pass, because he was doing Greco that he remembered doing when he was young in Brazil from Bob Anderson, who taught a young Hickson, a young Higan, and a couple others Greco. And that was one of the things that changed the jiu-jitsu very early on, because they took that Greco principles, which is the sag and hips, and making sure you load your weight onto your opponent. And Higan really blew that up, because when I was a white and a blue belt, me and Bob Bass would take Higan over to the wrestling room at El Camino so he could learn Greco, because he was really interested in learning the Greco. But he couldn't tell Horion because they didn't want martial arts to mix and them to learn our style, because it was more of a secret tech. So like I say, back in the early days, the rule that I learned, which is pretty much how I still go, if they don't ask, you don't tell. You don't volunteer. Hey, you want me to show you how I got you in an armbar? No, fuck you. If your ego can't say, wow, how'd you do that? I ain't going to fucking show you.
Yeah.
And the judo guys would never ask.
Yeah.
Because they thought it was just good judo.
Yeah.
So fuck them. I'm not going to tell them. I'm going to learn their judo, and then I'm going to kick their ass on the mat.
Yeah.
The JKD guys would ask. The Aikido guys would ask me, like, wow, how did you do that? What was that?
Yeah.
So I would teach them. And then if you challenged, you would arrange a challenge fight.
Ah.
To the death.
And then John Machado's in Texas?
What? John
John's in
Machado's
Texas?
still in Texas. Yeah,
John's
right?
in Texas, yep.
John's in
And
He
then
moved
Carlos?
there about 10
Oh, yeah,
years ago.
Carlos. Where's Carlos?
Carlos is in Dallas.
Oh, yeah, he's
Dallas?
in Texas, too.
And then John. Where's John?
John's in Texas.
John's in Texas.
Johnny
John and
Carlos
Carlos are in
Texas. John
All right.
Jackson.
Hodger's in Pasadena.
Hodger's in Pasadena.
Higan's
He's
in
Beverly
Hollywood.
Hills. They
Yeah,
all
that's
left
the
the
center
South Bay. They left
Yes.
us hanging.
Ah.
They
Keep
all
Spencer
left
here.
us hanging in the South Bay without a
How
Machado
often
rep.
do you talk to or see Higan these days?
I'd say at least once a year.
Yeah.
They like to have Christmas parties.
Yeah.
And Bob is still really close with them.
in the last couple of years, he's gotten more close.
Casey.
Yep.
And they went to they had a Machado camp that Chris couldn't make, but they had a camp. And didn't Bob get his corral belt?
Bob got his corral belt.
Bob Bass got one of the first American legit corral belts.
Yeah. But Casey Olson,
legit, too legit, too quick.
But Casey Olson and I have a very parallel career. In some ways, Eric Paulson also has it. Unbeknownst to each other, me, Eric, and thing, we all like to train with all of them.
Yeah.
But didn't really advertise it because you get things. So he also maintained a relationship with Hickson. Eric Paulson got Hickson his first fight in Japan. And the Machados were training Eric Paulson. Like, there was a thing in those early days where you would just keep it on the down low that you were training with other people because it was just culturally something you wouldn't do. The Machados didn't really care, whereas like Horion would care, but they didn't encourage you to go run off and train at some other school either, right? Yeah. It was like a whole other thing. And in the last 5 years, I've been training with Hickson more than any of the Machados.
Yeah.
Do I consider myself a Machado guy? Sure. Do I consider myself a Hickson guy? Sure. Do I consider myself a Gracie Jiu-Jitsu practitioner? Yes. Do I consider myself an independent grappler? Yes.
OG grappler guy.
Yeah.
And Hickson's moving away, so you probably won't train with him anymore.
So I probably won't train with Hickson, which is a bummer because I cherished because it was really good to have some mentorship with an aging athlete trying to adapt jiu-jitsu, especially in this age of the modern athletic game, which you just can't really do anymore.
When I heard that he was moving, that was immediately what I thought. I was like, oh man, I hope
Chris doesn't cry.
I hope Chris isn't bummed, and I hope that Chris finds something to be excited about relating to jiu-jitsu.
Oh, I can find
as a mentor
anything to be. I'm ADHD. I can always
one more question about Machado. So, my white through purple belt was with Pedro Soriano in San Pedro, and he's a student under Paulo Guilo Bell.
Yes.
And
who I watched Keegan give that guy everything.
So Guilo Bell, they had a Machado Academy in San Pedro, right? Isn't that right?
He would come to the 190th school a lot.
I think Keegan hired Guilo Bell from Brazil to teach, right?
He didn't teach at our academy
But he taught at San Pedro. I think they opened a San Pedro.
In Pedro.
Oh, okay.
And
before he moved to San Diego with the Ribeiro brothers.
Yep. So Keegan wanted to do a school in San Pedro. He opened it up and hired Guilo Bell as the instructor.
Yes.
Pedro trained under Guilo Bell there. And then Guilo Bell left to San Diego and left that school to Pedro.
Yes.
Oh.
So that's where that, that's how that started.
I did know that.
So, yeah, interesting, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's the origin of Pedro's school.
Yep. And that Pedro school has a very Pedro vibe.
Pedro
Soriano.
Pedro.
But Pedro's Pedro.
Pedro and Pedro.
Yeah, no, Pedro's awesome. Yeah.
The Pedro vibe, the Wilmington vibe.
Yeah.
There's an East LA vibe. There's a South Bay vibe. There's a West Side vibe.
It was a badass.
There's a Hollywood vibe. That's LA.
It was a badass place to train. I liked the experience that I had there, and I'm grateful for the experience of being around Pedro and learning from him in my early jiu-jitsu experience.
Let's call it your formative years.
I got the authentic Brazilian style jiu-jitsu experience with him, which was nice.
Pound that like button and subscribe.